Good morning and welcome to Reuters Events on the Verge of Cop26, the Net Zero Imperative in the Decade of Action webinar in partnership with Schneider Electric. I'm pleased to be joined today by Harry Verge, Head of Global Public and Government Affairs for Signify, John Hoekstra, Vice President of Global Sustainability and Clench Operations from Schneider Electric, Vanessa Perez, Global Deputy Lead of the Climate and Energy Practice in WWF International, Emma Watson, Senior Net Zero Manager for SBTI for CDP, and Ben Keller, Director of Business Strategy, Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, who will be leading today's discussion. But before we start, please remember to post your questions to our panelists using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Ben to start the discussion. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Anna. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's hard to imagine, isn't it, more that could be at stake with COP26 around the corner. So we've got this sort of really once in a generation opportunity to really sort of divert the course of human society and, dare I say, human history. So we've got a great panel today really exploring what might this all mean for to enable this sort of transition. According to the Race to Zero, we've got now 733 cities, 31 regions, over 3,000 businesses, and 173 of the biggest investors all signing up to net zero goals. And that's growing, as we're coming into net zero. So I think we're in a period now we're starting to see great commitments aligning with the science and real snowballing of that. But we know the commitments, just the very start of the journey. It's then very much the how. How do we move forward? And that's where I think the reality is most businesses, most organizations are very much sort of at the beginning of their journey. So that's what we want to kind of explore today. And as we explore it, we don't just want to think about what's within the immediate sphere of control of most businesses, their products and services and the energy they buy. We also want to think about how are businesses engaging upstream in their supply chains? How are they engaging with supply chains and some of the complex, challenges to decarbonize their supply chains? But also how are they enabling downstream, the sort of products and service systems in which their products get used in, so whether that's the shift to this, sharing economy or, low carbon mobility, what's the role in working with others in the delivery and use of the products and services, in markets and in society. So we want to be looking at a whole range of options that, organizations can play. So that's why I'm really delighted that we've got such a, great panel to help us explore this. To set a bit of context, Emma's very kindly agreed to give us a bit of a sneak preview into a very important standard that's going to be coming forward very soon. And then we're going to be hearing from each of the other speakers to get an initial perspective from them on their view on this and what are some of the lessons that they've learned. We'll then be opening up, having a bit of a conversation between us, just exploring some of the themes, the challenges and the opportunities. And then we'd really love to explore some of the questions that you have, or indeed insights you want to kind of share with us. So please do use the Q&A function to share your questions as we go. And then we'll be, right from the word go, please feel free to share them. And then we'll start to draw on those to bring you all into the conversation. So that's what we've got planned. So Emma, if I could hand over to you, it'd be great to hear if you could do the big reveal, please.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. Sorry, I'm just sharing my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that now. If you wouldn't mind just giving me a little nod. But yes, so hello everyone. My name is Emma Watson. I am the Senior Manager for Net Zero at the Science Based Targets Initiative based out of CDP's London office. So my job at the Science Based Targets Initiative is to lead the project that's ongoing and due to launch next Thursday, in fact, to develop a net zero standard for companies to set net zero targets. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm just going to take you through some of that background now. So I guess starting with the Science Based Targets Initiative, so we're actually a partner NGO made up of representatives from 4 different NGOs. So I'm from CDP and Vanessa is from WWF, but we also work with colleagues from the UN Global Compact and the World Resources Institute. And the Science Based Targets Initiative was formed in 2015, just before the Paris climate talks. And essentially at that time, companies didn't really know how to translate the Paris climate goals to keep global warming well below 2 degrees into something that they could action themselves. So that's really where Science Based Targets Initiative came from. And to put it very, very simply, science-based targets are essentially a mechanism for companies to understand how much and how fast they need to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to be in line with those Paris temperature goals. And specifically, at the moment, they look at a 5 to 15-year time horizon. So moving on, since then, we've been kind of in operation with science-based targets for a few years now, but there was a recognition that many companies were setting net zero targets, but there's a huge variety in how companies were doing that. So looking at different target boundaries, including different parts of their greenhouse gas footprint, including just their own operations, or perhaps, as Ben mentioned, all of their value chains as well. So lots of companies setting net zero targets in very distinct and different ways. So that was really why we set out to develop the net zero standard, much like previously when we're looking to translate the Paris climate goals, the temperature goals, into something that companies could enact in the short term. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, what do these long-term global net zero goals or country level net zero goals as well mean for companies? So it really kicked off, I suppose, at the end of last year when we published our Net Zero Foundations paper. So that's available on our website and really spells out the key concepts for our work on net zero. And then after that, we set up an expert advisory group, which is made up of around 40 experts from civil society, academia, business, and science as well. So they've really guided us throughout the whole process, and we meet with them on a very regular basis. Then at the beginning of this year, we drafted some initial criteria that went out to public consultation, which you may have seen. And we had an absolutely unprecedented response to that public consultation. So nearly 400 people responded from a huge variety of different organizations, countries, sectors that were interested and had feedback for us. And it was a very long and complicated document. So we were very surprised by that response as well. So after that, we kind of took the feedback and we started to refine the criteria in consultation with our expert advisory group to figure out, okay, what does this mean? And then this summer, we put that to test with 84 companies from a variety of sectors and geographies to see, okay, how does this work in practice and how can we improve it before launch? We then put that to a second public consultation and we launched next Thursday. So that's a bit about the process. Now I'm going to take you through what the standard actually asks companies to do. So there are 4 things that companies should be looking at when they're setting net zero targets in conformance with the net zero standard. So the first is to set a near-term science-based target, and that's the kind of regular science-based targets that we've been working on for the last 5 years. However, the key difference here is that we've decreased the time frame from a maximum of 15 years to 10 years. So we really want to encourage that kind of short-term action before 2030. And also, targets have to be in line with 1.5C. So we've ramped up the ambition there as well from a maximum of well below 2C at the moment. The second element is that companies need to set a long-term science-based target. And that essentially tells the company how much they need to reduce their emissions to be in line with global net zero scenarios in line with 1.5C as well. So that's often called essentially figure out your residual emissions. So what is left essentially at the very end that you can't abate. So we've done a lot of work creating those methods, and that's essentially what is the kind of new element of science-based targets. The third element is that while we're transitioning towards net zero, companies should also be taking action outside of their science-based targets to invest in mitigation outside the value chain. So, for example, this could be investing in high quality jurisdictional RED+ credits, or investing directly in carbon dioxide removal technologies such as direct air capture. So this is what has previously essentially been known as offsetting, but it's a bit more of a wider kind of catch-all term for companies to be making the investments to accelerate the societal transition towards net zero. And then finally, when we reach that long-term science-based target, any emissions that are left, and for some companies, this could be no emissions left, but for most companies, it's going to be about 10% of their base year emissions. They need to then neutralize those remaining emissions with carbon dioxide removals. So really, what it means is that companies are going to reduce their emissions by at least 90%, and then anything else that needs to be balanced out. And so just to kind of round it off, essentially what we'll be looking to validate through net zero targets is that companies' targets are complete, they're covering all the right emission sources across the whole value chain of the company, that they cover the right time frame. So we not only cover the shorter term time frame to make sure that we have that action in the near term, but also have that longer term ambition and have the direction to follow. The third thing is that they have the right ambition in mind. So essentially that they are reducing their emissions in line with what's needed, that they are taking early action through their near-term targets. And also the fifth and final thing is that they're accountable for their targets. So by reporting their targets to us, they'll be on our website, we'll have a measurement and reporting and verification process that they'll go through. So they remain accountable for their net zero targets and bring it a bit more credibility. So I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. So thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists. Super.
Thanks, Emma. We've already had a sort of great question through already, which we'll hold back on for a moment. But so Emma, thank you very much indeed. That's really, I'm sure we'll explore that further. So that's helped us a bit of a sense of what is this thing net zero? What do we mean by it? Let's get some sort of definitions and framing. I'd like to now turn to Harry. Harry, if you could maybe share some of what have been some of your insights and experiences at Signify.
Yes, so thank you, Ben, and thank you, Emma. I think a really deep belief that has guided us all along is that the best solutions for the future are those where environmental, economical, and social benefits go hand in hand. And in that sense, addressing climate change and sustainable development more broadly is a huge innovation agenda. And innovation is also crucial for any company's future. So that is a guiding belief that we had. So at the time when the European Commission was contemplating how to translate the Kyoto Treaty into regulation, we also felt, then if we're not involved, then probably there will be a lot of bureaucracy and checking and thinking that we wouldn't want to move in that direction. So then we made a proactive approach and actually engaged with the European Commission, also with the UN, also with the US, and let's say all countries across the world through OECD and UN, and created a program to phase out inefficient lighting globally. And now that's sheer logic, but I think at one moment we also we feel you need to walk the talk. So at one moment, it was in December 2006, we called on the global phase out of incandescent light bulbs. And we repeated that in March 2007 in Washington, because then also that it would be more seen in the media there. But that was both symbolic, because the incandescent light bulb is the first mass electric appliance, but it's also very much needed, because it was the least efficient thing, I think, that of anything we use in the home or at work or in city infrastructure. But also lighting at the time was 19%, so almost 1/5 of global electricity consumption. Anyway, so that has moved really far now. We're now 85% LED. We see that we're the leader in the legacy industry, but we're also a leader in the new industry of connected LED lighting, which is pretty unique. And we see other examples where companies fall in love with the cash flow of the old technology, and then they are too late, because it's not the big who eat the small, but it's the fast who eat the slow. But then also, again, talking about climate and science-based targets, and then also in Paris, we know the Paris Agreement came out of that meeting, but it was not sure on beforehand. And so we felt also in Paris, we need to make a commitment. So we launched midway the conference and also then shared it with Cristiano Figueres and a lot of others. And we launched our commitment to become carbon neutral in 5 years' time, which we became September last year. And as Emma mentioned, so yeah, we reduced our energy consumption by 70%, and we moved completely to renewable electricity. And indeed, there's some compensation through forestation and other credit-based programs. And we're looking at those. So how can you go from neutral to zero? Because it's really also an agenda of progress. So you need a dashboard for that. So we are a member of the Science-Based Targets. Also, 6 of the SDGs are our dashboards. But what is also important, and that's maybe then the last remark on that, Ben, is that we put it also in business planning. We put it into the reward system, because this is really at the core of our future. And you can only, you better lead the future that we need instead of be lagging, because then first of all, you won't really make it in the best of shapes, but then also collectively we won't make it.
Super, Harry, thanks very much. And I think, I love the sort of reference there to how you've really, used a whole range across the business, from both, your innovation into the business, how you've engaged through collaborations. You've pulled a sort of number of levers there, if you will, which is, great to see. Let's take another kind of business view. So John, if I can maybe turn to you, it'd be great to get your take from Schneider Electric's experience. What are some of the lessons in your net zero journey?
Yeah, kind of similar to Harry. We've been at this a while, right? For the last 10 or 15, well, not even 10, 15, 20 years, and kind of thinking through what's our place and what's our responsibility from kind of a broad sustainability, but certainly on the climate issue as well. So I've been involved, historically at COP and various things of really trying to understand what's that journey. And I think for us, it all starts with our purpose to bridge sustainability and progress for all. And so what we see is we have a responsibility both upstream and downstream of what we do at Schneider to really be part of the solution. And so we think that starts a little bit by leading by example, and I'll touch on a couple of those points. Harry, you mentioned Walk the Talk. Being a French company, we talk about drinking our own champagne when it comes to that area, but it's the idea of how do we really prepare a leading commitment and ambition to essentially then support our ability to partner with our customers around solutions to help them decarbonize and be resilient and adapt to, potentially what's on the horizon. So the way that transcends for us is we were partnering with the Science-Based Targets Initiative early on. We were fortunate to be one of the earlier ones to adopt the 1.5 degree C science-based targets. So good to see that us by taking that extra leap, it sounds like Emma will still be in line for some of the net zero aspirations under the net zero standard. And so what that kind of manifests itself is sort of saying, how do we get, this is a marathon, right? When we think about the horizon of 2050. And so for us, one of the things that we really like to commit to are sprints or steps in order to get to that marathon. So we've got some sprints on the horizon, where by 2025 being carbon neutral for our operations, also partnering upstream with our Scope 3 suppliers to cut in half their footprint. And then by 2030, looking at net zero operations. So excited to see that standard and really kind of mapping out then that roadmap of how we'll do it. There's a lot that we don't know, right? And I think a lot of companies sit in that boat that we don't exactly know how we're going to get there, but feel like we need to get on that ambition and that road essentially to help collectively achieve it. 2040 carbon neutral value chain, and then by 2050, hopefully we can get to that net zero value chain. And so what we find is by doing so and seeking to do it through energy efficiency, process automation, renewables, looking at high quality carbon credits and opportunities as mentioned, it gives us the experience of going through that journey, where then we do a lot to turn around and partner with our customers around doing so as well. So we're in the business of helping folks reduce their energy, helping them set and understand these net zero targets. What are those all about from an advisory standpoint, and then really help them drive that implementation plan to get there. So it's a long journey, a big road ahead. Looking forward to the balance of this conversation, but that's a bit how Schneider's been looking at it. And there's plenty of challenges and stuff behind the scenes that where when we're getting our hands dirty there. What I think excites our group is that it really is the defining challenge of our generation. And so having a role and a part to play in helping move towards that solution is just an exciting place to be, even though it's a bit daunting and scary.
Super, thanks, John. It'd be great to unpack some of those elements as well further. So thanks for giving us a nice overview there. So Vanessa, really great you can join us from WWF International. This is obviously an area you're deeply familiar with. It'd be great to get your sense of what are some of the lessons, but also what are some of the expectations you have of the role of business. It'd be great to hear your initial reflections.
Definitely, Ben. Thank you so much for the invite. And so I'll start by picking up one of the things you said at the beginning. Definitely, we have to move to action. Probably in the business side of things is scalable action. I think businesses have taken action for many years. And now we're thinking about how they can push governments to do more. But I think what it is so important about the talk today is not only about action, it's about credible action. And I think that I just want to really emphasize the role of the net zero standard by SBTi, because it does two key things. One, it rescues the concept of net zero. It has been strongly criticized everywhere, particularly because of the offsetting and the greenwashing, right? So by putting this standard and making it the go-to place, it rescues the net zero concept. We all want a zero carbon future, and I think we will achieve it, but definitely according to IPCC, we'll get to, if we all work together in a scalable fashion, we'll get to net zero by 2050, and that's the best we can do. And I think companies are showing that they can do this even before that, right? And they need to do it in a credible way, because the marketplace is demanding credibility, just yelling for credibility. And I think the other thing that the net zero standard of SBTi does is actually clarifies the role of nature, right? And there it puts a role for nature in three different places within the value chain for land intensive companies. It puts also a role for nature in beyond value chain mitigation. And so we are almost within WWF trashing the word offsets, because it actually takes you to the conventional offsets that are offsetting, above the curve and not, below the curve. And that's actually investments in nature-based solutions. And then it does clarify the role of neutralization, right? And clarifies that bid on neutralization is not very large. It's about 10%, probably for some businesses, it would be a little bit more than 10%, for some of them below 10%, depending on the sector, and actually creates sectoral pathways for those. So I just wanted to kind of very much hail the standard by SBTi, but also thank all of the companies that have actually embraced it, because the relevance of this is not only the credibility, the alignment with science, but also the consultation process. So everybody, this is almost like an announcement, but it's an announcement from my heart. But please do participate and be there on October 28th when the standard gets released. And I'll be probably I already spoken a bit too much, so I'll wait for my next round, Ben. But I'd love to tell you a little bit on how we've worked with businesses around climate action at the national level, and I think that's really important. But I wanted to make these high-level points first. Over back to you, Ben.
And I just would make a quick comment there, Vanessa, that I think what the importance of having the standard, it can't be underscored enough, because I think from I don't know, Harry, about you, but from sort of a business community point of view, I think we've heard absent policy or regulatory guidance of what's going to be required on certain things, there's a lot of inertia, because industry tends to wait for what that's going to look like. So I think now that there's going to be a solidified standard, it can change that inertia into that credible action kind of moving forward. So I think that's really important for the business community to have that, so that we can, not that we're standing still already, but it offers a platform to take much more aggressive action more quickly to the extent possible.
I think also there, yeah, we lost Ben, I think, for a second, but then maybe just one remark and one question to Emma. So I think you're right, John, but I think also then as a business head, then we need a standard and we need a dashboard to measure progress, because what gets measured has a higher likelihood of getting done. But also you mentioned something that I find is really crucial, and that is getting your hands dirty. Because also a policy should be tested by implementation, but also technologies will be tested by implementing them. And in that sense, yeah, I think we look at the logic fits in a nutshell. Apart from the fact that we need also to work on the psychological part of people embracing change, because I think that's holding back a part of the progress. We need to see this as an opportunity. And why is opportunity missed by most? Yeah, because it is dressed up and overall it looks like work. But once you start working on this, you see huge engagement, but also you see a lot of learning with which you can fine-tune business models, policy measures, and all of that. So I think that's really important, and that's what we see happening with our people. But I was also curious, and then we'll let Ben back in, and then with the scaling and the increase in membership. So how do you see, let's say, how much carbon reduction potentially is you see the Science-Based Targets program then embracing in the coming decades?
That is a very good question, and I know that someone has done the maths, because we do have a progress report that we put out annually in January, and I'm afraid I haven't read it since last January. However, I guess kind of speaking to that, we have a campaign that sits under the Race to Zero, which is a kind of corporate route into the Race to Zero called the Business Ambition for 1.5C campaign. And I think that started about a year and a half ago. And at the time, we weren't really sure, how companies would feel about committing to 1.5C in such a, I guess, strong manner, looking at, the whole value chain as well, or committing to net zero. And that campaign has grown and grown and grown, and we're just about to reach 1,000 companies before COP. So that's a really exciting, I think, indication of how many companies are going to embrace this standard and kind of take these steps. But the figures I don't have off the top of my head. Maybe Vanessa knows.
No, I was not talking about the figures, but I was just signaling to Ben that there's a question there that is quite interesting. So what's after 2050, right? And talking about offsets and so on and so forth. I mean, on the one hand side, there are companies that are getting to net zero before 2050, right? But what we're thinking about in WWF is kind of transitioning to climate positive. And really very much thinking about what that means and how that looks like. And it goes, it goes beyond the value chain and really compensating everything that is below the curve, right? You could even be, climate positive by thinking about your historical emissions and how you can compensate those. How can you connect with governments? How can you push policy forward, right? And something very, very important to mention, and I think this is very aligned to the SBTi net zero standard, is we put out there a mitigation hierarchy in what we call the blueprint for corporate ambition on climate and nature. And actually, basically, it's a very simple concept. You first avoid, then you reduce, then you report, and then the last thing you do is compensate. So I think it really puts the emphasis on the adequate blocks, and that's what SBTi is asking companies to do. And of course, everybody jumps right forward to the compensation side, like really quickly, right? And when it is very much the last thing you should be thinking about, you can do it today if you actually have a good pathway, and you can invest in nature-based solutions if you found a fantastic project out there. And definitely we want to put out there that SBTi very much takes and looks forward to nature-based solutions investments, but not instead of what they need to be doing. right? And so I think by doing a joint effort and getting behind that standard, we're going to do a lot for both climate ambition and nature ambition, right? And that's the type of convergence that we would like to see. And so we're thinking and talking with several companies of what that climate positive could look like and what are the elements of that climate positive for that. But those are some of the ideas.
Thanks, Vanessa. And what I like about, by the way, apologies for dropping out there, what terrible hosting. But great, such a great group, carried on a fantastic conversation, it sounds like. So Vanessa, what I like also about that sort of hierarchy, because it's often referred to as the carbon hierarchy, isn't it? That it also makes better business sense, right? Because it's both, isn't it? Because it's both where the biggest gains can be made most cost effectively, as well as sort of the right thing to do, which is a nice sort of alignment of that, isn't it? Emma, is there anything you want to add from an SBTi perspective on offsets, either kind of the measurement or positioning, anything you want to build on from Vanessa's perspective?
I think, I guess from our perspective, when we did the first public consultation, we did come out with quite a lot of criteria around offsetting. And the feedback that we got was very polarized, but also we realized that there's, a lot of work going on in this space to increase the credibility of, I guess, what we're calling beyond value chain mitigation, but offsets or carbon credits. There's so many groups that are working on this to try and improve it, because the urgency of increasing, climate finance towards stopping deforestation is incredibly important. But right now, we don't really have the kind of mechanisms in place, and therefore it's very difficult for us at that point to develop criteria. So we kind of took a step back from that. And this is the kind of TBC portion of the net zero standard, whether we then develop criteria or perhaps we endorse a partner or a third party that is doing that in a very credible way. But yes, it's a bit of a kind of difficult topic, but it's something that we just definitely want to not stop happening, just make sure that it's happening in a very transparent and high quality way.
So I'll just add there a bit, Ben, and I think already like high level guidance is already given by the standard. And so I think that everybody must have that in mind, that this kind of mitigation hierarchy is already there, that the neutralization bit is somewhere between 5 and 20%, probably somewhere around 10%, and that's something to think about, right? That there's the whole below the curve opportunity for investment in high quality red credits out there, but not instead of, in addition to. And so that's already quite a lot of guidance there. Whether it is more effective to do one thing or invest in technology rather than nature-based solutions, etc., and what criteria are something to be seen, and we're very prepared in terms of experience within WWF to provide inputs within SBTi, and we hope that SBTi moves forward in giving a clear guidance that is within the umbrella of SBTi. I think it would be really important not to start to get the different pieces in different places, but rather put them all on the same umbrella, I would say.
I might interject to say that I think the conversation around nature-based solutions and carbon credits is super important, right? And we've got to get that sort of moving, because we recognize the role that may or will have for the unabatable emissions when we, start arriving to the time period. But I think one of the things that I worry about sometimes is I don't want that to distract the work that companies need to be doing around reducing, figuring out how to be more efficient, not only in their own operations, but also be thinking about, at least for us, one of the big things that we think about is sustainable design of our products, because our products essentially have a huge impact on the ability to reduce emissions from the energy spectrum. How are we digitizing? How are we thinking about doing things more digitally, more smartly, that is going to essentially have an impact? And we're actually doing some research, and at COP we'll be talking more about it. But what is the impact of modernizing the economy have on our trajectory around carbon emissions? And so I think the carbon credit talk is important, but it has to be done concurrently with how we're reducing, looking at opportunities to replace by looking at more renewable solutions. Harry mentioned looking at renewable, not only electricity, but renewable thermal and some of those areas, and solving what are some really big challenges in that market. And I think we need to do it. And Vanessa, I liked how you kind of framed up that scalable, credible action. And so I think in order to do that, what we see is the true need for each company to have their own roadmap, have a roadmap that makes sense to their business, their organization, and it's achievable, and then you go fast after it. And then as well, I think there's a role in the business community, maybe even potentially with NGOs and otherwise, to collaborate. And I think the collaboration principle is what's going to get to that scalable action more quickly. So we're working on some things with like Walmart around their gigaton program to say, how do we pull together Walmart suppliers in a consortium to go out and buy renewable energy? So it's things like that I think is making access to decarbonization and mitigation solutions that'll be critical for us to hit the path.
And maybe adding to that, so then John is hitting the nail on the head, because we know we need massive forestation. We need compensation, not only to get to zero on your dashboard, but simply because there's a lot of carbon out there and still more to come. But in order to accelerate, to speed up the climate journey, we need to massively scale up energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is not an invisible form of energy, but it means renovating infrastructure. So the magic number there is 3%, and also there we work together with Schneider Electric in a number of initiatives on getting governments to support, and not only them to execute, but for them to support and create enabling frameworks to more than double renovation rates of infrastructure to 3% per year, because that needs to bring like half of the reduction, and then indeed scale up renewables. So if we succeed in creating more action, then indeed, for part, unfortunately, but then for part we need credits. Sometimes I compare this, in medieval times you could buy Hail Marys from the church to pay down on guilt.
Yeah.
So that, we shouldn't be seeing it like this. We should be seeing this as something we need, but then as a third pillar of action after efficiency and renewables, then indeed what still needs to be done and what should be done fast is invest in carbon capture.
Yeah,
Thanks, Harry.
No, and thank you, John, for that, and Harry. I completely agree, and great to see it coming from you guys, and not only from the climate community. I wanted just to emphasize two things. One, on the peer-to-peer collaboration, completely agree. I mean, this is a journey, and a bit of another infomercial, but we have a program called the Climate Business Network, where actually companies that are setting science-based targets or that commit to be setting science-based targets in the near future come together and say, okay, we probably cannot do it today, but we'll commit to do it next year, and what are the challenges they're facing. Also, companies from the south that can be connected to supply chains. So I think that peer-to-peer collaboration is definitely super important. And then the other piece is about the enabling frameworks and what can companies do on enabling frameworks. And I'm just impressed by the previous story of Mexico, where I was working for WWF there, and how companies actually came together to change and restructure the electricity system to bring the price of solar to its lowest historical price, right? And so that's the kind of collective action that companies can do together in alliances, in coalitions, to put the leveling enabling frameworks to scale up action, not only for companies but actually for governments. Back to you, Ben.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and Emma, you're going to build on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one recent example that I saw that I thought was really cool. So in the UK, I used to work quite closely with Network Rail, who look after the railway lines, and they set a science-based target so that their suppliers would also set science-based targets. But what they realized was that they shared the same suppliers with others in the Department for Transport, Highways England, lots of other transport companies in the UK. So their procurement teams came together and did a series of workshops on science-based targets. And they've now, I think, achieved around 40% of their suppliers setting science-based targets. So I think identifying those other companies that have similar supply chains can be super powerful as well.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is a sort of a number of different levers being pulled, both setting out the intention and direction of travel as a company, which can help to signal to, you know, potential new allies, be they customers, suppliers, and so on, using product innovation, using a combination of advocacy as well. Harry, you mentioned that. I guess, John and Harry, have you got other sort of examples from your experience where you've maybe leveraged, say, product innovation or product development, either with others, where that's worked well for you, and maybe where you need to pull other levers to make that work well, either through a coalition or through advocacy? I wonder if either of you had, Harry, you sort of touched on a few of those, I think, in your opening statement, but anything you want to share that you found as well?
Well, so I think the innovation should be in different areas, both in technology, in policies, and in business models. And there also, as John mentioned, then product innovation is not only going to more efficiency, but also to more modular products. So let's say to allow actually circular business models. So what we are doing there, because we know that all the good measures they require some investment, but if you can take the investment hurdle away by offering a life cycle based business model, and where you look at what service do you provide instead of invoicing hardware. So we developed a service that's called Lighting as a Service. So then we work directly in partnership with some of our customers by actually only charging them for the amount of light that they use per month. So then that hurdle is taken away. But it means on the technical part that also you make your products modular, you make them upgradable, both in software and in hardware. But it also means that at the policy side, there are certain things really needed in terms of procurement. Because procurement practices, they still quite often, they steer to the lowest initial price tag. And we know it's detrimental. And sometimes it's even a lame excuse. And I guess, sorry, this is what my procurement team tells me to do. And then, yeah, so the three combined are really, let's say, a recipe to increase speed of action.
I wholeheartedly agree with you there, Harry. And I think, you know, there's a tremendous amount of work that we've got going into. I mentioned some sustainable product design and that item of circularity. I mean, the reality is, you know, we have energy solutions deployed around the world, and so we're trying to figure out what's the way that as those reach or their useful end of life, et cetera, how can we participate in reintroducing some of that back into our supply chain as a way that then it prevents that from needing to be manufactured, you know, from inception. And so we're thinking through a lot of those types of programs. One, we have a SF6 free solution where if you look back a while ago, transformers use SF6, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, a really high global warming potential. So we're doing a lot to think about circular programs where we can go back into the built infrastructure where that may be there. And then to Harry's other point, think about unique as a service or other types of business or models, let's say, to essentially accelerate the change out and replacement of those sorts of things. So that's just one example program, but we have plenty others that we're working on and frankly need to do. But I think it starts with recognizing the importance and also then being able to connect with how do programmatic elements like that, then how do you turn around and report and essentially disclose what impact that does have on your scope 3 emissions or what have you underneath these standards or otherwise. So I think the value of having really strong reporting platforms, a sustainability ERP, if you want to call it something like that, becomes critical for a business to really manage this sort of thing in the same way that you'd manage your quarterly earnings statements. So we do a lot of work and have a bunch of conversations with clients and customers around how to institutionalize that programmatic nature of really driving towards these goals and targets.
Right, yeah, and that's really helpful. Thanks, John. I think that links, let's bring some of the questions in. Thanks everyone for submitting some really great questions there. is that I think for example, here it's like, how do businesses navigate the complexity of cause and effect, of all decisions being made? Recognize we've got increased demand for energy, and what the impacts on renewable energy and the impact on the ecological footprint. And because I think one of the big shifts, isn't it, is thinking about what are those maybe unintended consequences, but also where businesses are used to think of themselves as links in a chain, aren't they, that are relatively stable. If they provide that link in the chain, the rest of the chain makes money. But often what this is about is actually working right across the whole, actually more of a network than a chain, to think about whole new business models, whole new ways of delivering, net zero solutions, which require thinking about unintended consequences up and downstream, think about, working with others to create those new solutions, not necessarily being all done by one business. So I just wondered, do any of you have any kind of reflections on either principles or lessons where you've had to really think about the whole system? Harry, over to you.
No, maybe in simple words, I think so. You need to move away from a model of selling more stuff. So we moved from a model where more is better to a model where better is best, and then see that this is not a matter of how many bulbs you can sell, but what value do you create for your customers. And if we go to more efficient solutions, they offer more value. If we then look at the quality of light, that translates in comfort, that we see, for instance, with connected LED street lighting, that it reduces street crime and nighttime traffic accidents. Then lighting becomes digital, so then it can become the backbone of the IoT. Because then, by coincidence, not by coincidence, but then good for us is that lighting is the most granularly distributed service around the world. There are close to 30 billion light points. So that's why digital lighting offers that option. And then you can work with city mayors to create a smart city infrastructure. And then based on the lighting fixtures with this example, and John will also have other examples, you can include sensors that sense air quality or that monitor traffic flow. And then you see maybe a last one on that part, that lighting is a wave, like in the radio bandwidth. And then the Wi-Fi bandwidth is getting congested. And then we see hey, the lighting bandwidth is completely empty. So we launched a technology called Li-Fi, superimposing data on light waves. So then suddenly, anyway, so it's a constant innovation race. And then you just move away as a first step from selling more stuff to looking at how can you improve the quality of the service that people get. And then it becomes really like a race to a better future that is super engaging, highly innovative, and creates value for all involved.
Great, thanks, Harry. That's a great example of where you're working with other customers, like with their city authorities, mayors, and so on, who often won't know what electricity lighting providers can provide, right? They don't know the technology. And also, what I liked was that idea of you're showing how it's also generating value for society and the environment, as well as, like through reducing crime, for example, as well, and those benefits. Vanessa, were you going to sort of add something there?
No. I said that's
okay.
Completely. I mean, I completely agree on that, and I think that's why also these coalitions of non-state actors are so important. Because if you take civil society with academia, with the business sector, and then when with city majors, I think that's such a powerful combination of people. And probably for different solutions you need different combinations of actors, but I think it is really important to have that peer-to-peer exchange within the business, but also with the other non-state actors, and I think that's important. The other thing I just what prompted me what Harry said, I completely agree that the change and the shift is towards quality and value. But also, I think we've done little on the service economy, and that's a big opportunity for us all to tap into, right? And that brings a lot of opportunity as well, to have just the service economy be a bigger weight of the economy as a whole. No, yeah, over.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I want to bring John in a moment, but also just an observation on that is that businesses' customers tomorrow might not be the same customers they are today. Like Harry, I'd imagine you'd be used to selling to retailers, for example, but actually think of mayors as potential future non-state actors who can help you innovate and even sell products too. It shifts that view potentially of who customers are. John, it'd be great to get your insights. What's kind of worked well from your perspective in Schneider?
Yeah, I thought I may just add from a different angle. I concur with, what was said previously, and Harry eloquently stated sort of that and I think part of that is this transition that we're going through, right? I think the climate transition is a transition, but there's also, whether it's transition more towards service economies to transition to more digital, there's all these transformations going on. And so when I was struck by the cause and effect, a tangible example that I see is a pretty substantial increase in the companies we're working with that are looking at not only mitigation, but also adaptation and resiliency. And so I think with that is not only getting more digital, but also getting more distributed as it relates to the energy equation. And so we've seen a really significant uptick in the utilization of microgrids, where you're able to then island power in certain areas around the world, where it not only offers a financial benefit, and there's an as a service type of approach to do that, where there's plenty of outside capital coming into sustainable investment in the space right now anyway, that's really enabling some unique ways in which cities, governments, companies, et cetera, can look at things differently. So my mind jumped to microgrid as a way to help mitigate risks around, climate events, because even if we when we mitigate our emissions to stay below that 1.5 degree C trajectory, it's still a temperature increase. We're already seeing physical events that are, impacting us when we think about that. So the topic of resiliency isn't going to go away even as we mitigate some of those emissions. And so that's just the natural cause and effect that we have. So at Schneider, what we're really trying to do is help folks plan for those physical risks, but also the transition risks to a low carbon economy, which I think spurs that aspect of how do I rethink how I do what my business is all about, and center around that value add to the customer or the client or the consumer. And then how does that then connect into all of this climate stuff and the climate strategy? So that's sort of the angle, I'll call it, or the realm that we're thinking about it.
Yeah, and one of the things I see a lot, John, is that because so many businesses up and down the value chain are figuring out what net zero means, people don't, there are some answers lying around. To Vanessa's point, there's a lot ready to be scaled, but actually it's often about figuring it out, isn't it? Because it's not, it's with suppliers and customers say, look, how do we decarbonize this system? To Harry's point, what's the system actually trying to achieve? What it's there for? What actual end value to society is it creating? Now, I want to also, just to kind of say from an academic perspective, I see that there's been some great sharing of resources from folk on the call. So thank you for that, and please keep it coming. Just to sort of add my bit, so here at CISL, we've created a report called Targeting Net Zero, which is meant to sort of a guide for businesses to decarbonize. So I'll drop a copy of that in the link. Emma, we've had a couple of questions, I think that's very much in your court. So going back to the standard, questions around verification, how do we hold people accountable to it, and so on. So I wonder if you could maybe speak to, if you like, the enforcement or maybe the disclosure part of the standard.
Yeah, sure. So I guess there are a few mechanisms in place at the moment that hold companies accountable, but we do have quite big plans to make these much more, I guess, to improve them. At the moment, I suppose what we see is that, of course, Science Based Targets initiative is a voluntary initiative. So companies that are doing it, they're putting a lot of kind of effort and rigor into the calculations that they're doing, and they're putting their reputations essentially on the line by signing up to something that will be reported annually and that we report on annually. So I think we've published 2 so far, but we have an annual progress report where we look at companies' progress against their targets and look at our overall impact. So that's the first, I guess, 2 things, is the reputation and the reporting. The other thing that holds companies accountable is that within their science-based targets, they have to review them every 5 years to make sure that they're in line with the latest climate science, that they're using the right methodologies. So Vanessa touched on earlier that we're working on a specific project through WWF for companies in the forest, land and agriculture sector to set science-based targets. And that's going to be quite a big change for companies in those sectors. So if they'd set, science-based targets 3 years ago, in 2 years, they'll have to look at that and then kind of rejig their targets as well. And of course, you know, I mentioned that within net zero, we've got the 5 to 10 year target and we've got the 2050 latest target. But when the company reaches the 5 to 10 year target, they'll have to refresh it. And so actually there's going to be quite a few on the way. On top of that, we are developing a measurement, reporting and verification standard. So that will kick off in January. And through that project, we really want to ensure the accountability. So that is a piece of future work that we're looking at as well. And I think someone asked if we would be verifying targets. So through the Science Based Targets Initiative, we do verify the targets, but one of the things we don't ask, which I perhaps wonder if we'll start to require, is that companies have their greenhouse gas inventories verified. So that's not something that we ask at the moment, but I think it's I mean, I would strongly advocate for that, and hopefully that will be something that comes in the near future.
Super, thanks very much. Well, it's amazing how time has rattled past. We've had loads of great questions. Unfortunately, we've only been able to scratch the surface. But folks, just before we end, I'd like to maybe just give each of you an opportunity to share what's the kind of one thing you would love to see happen to enable this sort of shift to net zero. So if you would like to maybe just raise a hand to come in with your kind of one sentence summary of what you'd love to see above all else. Vanessa, are you coming in there?
Sure. I'd love to see the whole of the business sector adopt net zero targets with the science-based targets. So that are science-based, and that everybody thinks of that as the credible science base for assessing net zero, and that we're all cultivated in doing that.
Super. Thank you. Harry.
Yes, I think, of course, we need to do a lot of the things that we spoke about, but I think also to increase the speed towards net zero, we need to give climate action more of a human face. So what does it really mean for people in terms of health? And also, of course, what is being discussed now in those economic recovery programs in terms of jobs and well-being. But I think certainly to give more of a human face, translate it to what it means for them at their personal level, have more comfortable living, cleaner air when you drive electric, less sound pollution. And I think because with that, then you would hope that they translate their better understanding of the benefits into more voting and buying behavior.
Super.
And we still see some countries then with a populistic approach, there's still possibility that they swing from for and against. So give it a human face.
Super. And then our last sort of 30 seconds, John.
Yeah, and I think for me, we've talked about collaboration to get to that scalable, credible action. And I think that's going to be key, not only from company to company, but really in partnership with the NGO community. So I think the aspect, the realization that these issues are hard, and they're really hard in a lot of industries. Think about mining and materials, or oil and gas and some of those pieces. But those industries know their business the best. So I think a true partnership and collaboration of understanding those challenges, having the right patience with setting the right target and bar. But I think that's going to be critical for us to achieve this.
Great. And almost out of time, Emma, last word to you.
I think for me, it would be matching their kind of science-based targets action with their political lobbying action from companies, because we see a lot of that not matching up sometimes. So that would be my ask.
Brilliant. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much indeed. And hopefully you found some real inspiration and insight here. So thank you very much indeed for joining us for this webinar, and all the very best in your journeys.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.